So now we're going to lighten the mood a little bit and we're going to write poetry with Rachel. And so Rachel's going to go ahead and share her screen.
All right. So I did this a little bit differently because I knew that I was going to be talking to librarians and teachers and other people who were interested. So I kind of took it in a direction of getting young people interested in poetry. So this is something I'm very passionate about. I do it with my kids all the time. So here we go. Kids are natural poets. I think we probably all know that. They are also natural storytellers. So from the youngest ages, they are drawn to stories, especially those with a lyrical quality about them, like picture books, rhyming picture books, prose that sounds like poetry, and silly made up nonsense words like Runny Babbitt, if y'all have ever read. I love Shel Silverstein. He's one of my favorites. So my kids love him too. So some of the earliest writing kids do is short and expressive and measured, like poetry is. But somewhere along the way, they lose that interest in writing poetry. And I always ask the question, why? But I can't ever really answer it. But I do believe they never lose their love for it. So I want to explore how we can nurture that love. And here are my suggestions. Take away the rules. So let's not worry about meter and rhyme and counting syllables and structure, form, theme, diction, all of those technical things. We just let them play and have fun and write about anything and say anything they want to say. They can make up their own rules and their own words if they want. We can analyze the poems after they're done playing. But I also have a stipulation here. Don't make judgments because we all have our own voice and style, and it's important to nurture that. I've met a lot of kids, and I was a kid myself who sometimes got discouraged by the things that we said about our poetry. So that it's important to me. I've seen my kids get discouraged, and that as a mom is just like, I'm a mom author. You're going to write. So So here's a prompt. I also provided some prompts for each of these suggestions so that you could use them in your classrooms or, in your libraries. So this is one that I use with kids a lot because kids, they experience emotions so strongly. So I asked them to think about something that made them very angry today or recently, and then write an angry poem about it. It can be a letter poem directed at what or who made you angry. And I make sure they know if it's a who, just make sure you're still kind. It can be an expression of your anger in short and angry words, or it can just simply explain why you're angry. So here's one of mine that I call this beat poetry. I can taste it. There is a rage in me that swells wild in the face of injustice. And it can be as short and sweet as that, And I tell them, guess what? Now you've written a beat poem like Allen Ginsberg, Neil Cassidy, or Diane DePrima. So they get to join the ranks of beat poets. Number 2 is keep it short, but also make it challenging. This is something I use. I mentioned I have a house full of neurodivergent people, and they're all gifted. And so I have to give them challenges. So introduce a challenge into short poetry forms like haiku, acrostic, limerick, tanka. Kids love it when things feel like a game. So let's make it like a game. Acrostics are probably one of the most popular forms of poetry among kids. And what I see in poetry workshops is they will typically, write the word that's going to be used in the acrostic, and then they'll just use one word per line. So we can make it more challenging by telling them to write a story in the poem and have more than one word per line. Or we can have them use 6 connecting haikus or 3 limericks to tell a short story about their pet or their best friend or what happened at their last family dinner. Or we can ask them to collaborate with another student where one writes a tanka and the next writes one that connects to the first. And they trade off until they've told a story. And I have here that would pair well with a reading of Nikki Grimes's Garvey's Choice. So that whole book is written in tanka poetry. Introducing challenges to simple poetry forms can feel like a game or a puzzle. I do say, though, make sure to give them an example of these things so they don't get overwhelmed, because sometimes when we give them challenges, they can, they can't really see what it's like in their minds. So giving them an example is really helpful. Or write with them. That's what I do with my kids. I'll write with them. So here's the prompt. Write an acrostic poem using the word magnificent, but make sure it tells a story. And here is mine. His name should be exigent. My cat is always groaning and mumbling, nagging me to itch his ears, but my fingers are instead clutching a pen and writing entertaining poems for nobody and everybody. So talk to me tomorrow, Harris. And my third suggestion is make it concrete. Poetry can be hands-on, so you can introduce art into poetry. Blackout poetry or erasure poetry is one of my favorite art forms to practice with kids. My kids and I do this all the time because we still subscribe to the newspaper, so they'll do that, or they'll rip out a page from a magazine and do blackout poetry. If you don't know what blackout poetry is, it's choosing words on a page to make a poem and then blacking out the rest of it with a Sharpie marker. So I have instructions here for you. Or collage poetry. You can cut out words from a magazine or an old book and make a poem. Or you can use the refrigerator magnet poetry, which is, I actually have some of that on my refrigerator that my sons and I will occasionally turn into poetry. Pictures and art can also inspire our creativity and be used as poetry prompts. So if you have an interesting picture or there's a painting in your room or something, those things can be huge inspirations for poetry. And then found poetry is also one of my favorites. So here are some instructions for that. You can let a kid pick a book from your library and then tell them they can pick a line from pages, and then you just list a number of pages and then challenge them to arrange those lines into a poem. So I turned that into a prompt that you can use with your students. So pick a line from pages 7, 25, 68, 80, 101, 132, 179. And I actually did that with The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which is one of my favorite books. And I wrote a poem called Seasons Change. Autumn. It was a lonesome Saturday. The turnip pot crackled. Not for a moment did I love the lies or the money. Maybe she wasn't so bad after all. I don't want to be ruined, except sometimes. And my last suggestion is make it a book. Kids feel super proud and encouraged when they see their name in print, and it can be something as simple as stapling those pages together and giving them a poetry book. So I just suggest collecting all of their poetry and turning it into a book that they can actually share with their family and friends. And then a bonus tip, be sure to include some blank pages for their continued play in poetry. And that's it. Happy creating.